This is new for me, so bear with me whilst we work through the technology as well. So my name's Louie Whitemore. I'm a set and costume designer. I work in theatre, dance and opera, as well as site-specific pieces and events. And I'm going to chat a bit about how I became a designer, my process of designing a show, and then we're going to look at potentially designing a bit together. So for those who've not come across my job before, in the loosest terms, it means I take the creative lead in a team of people that make the world in which the action takes place. And that includes what people wear. So when an audience member comes into an auditorium, they sit down, I decide as a set and costume designer what it is that they're looking at. And I do that in collaboration with the director or the choreographer if it's dance-based. For Theatre by the Lake, I've designed shows for both the theatre spaces because they've had the studio and the main house space. So in the studio, I've done Miss Julie, Creditors and Bold Girls. And then in the main house, Handbag, Single Spies, Dear Uncle, Lady Killers and The Rise and Fall of Little Voice. So it's a place very close to my heart. I grew up just over the hill on the edge of Lake Ullswater. For me, I try to make work that provokes a reaction, and it's important as a designer to try and work out what your aesthetic might be and what your end goal is when you're trying to come up with what you want to put on stage. The reaction that you provoke can be big or small, but it's really great to make work that means an audience member leaves thinking or talking about it beyond the 2 hours that they've been sat there watching it. I try and avoid the reaction of that was okay or that was fine. You can't ever predict what the reaction would be, but I want those watching the work I'm involved in to feel like something, having watched it. I sort of stumbled into design. As I say, I grew up on the edge of Lake Ullswater. Other than Theatre by the Lake, I didn't have a great deal of access to the arts. I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do. I wasn't particularly academically strong at school. Maths, pretty much hated maths, but thanks to a very persuasive drama teacher, I started out with the aim of being a fantastic stage manager. But then I realised you had to stay and watch a show every day, which was not what I was up for. So at the age of 15, I went to the National Youth Theatre, which does both acting and technical courses. So I couldn't recommend it enough. If you are interested in following through on some of these jobs that are described to you in the webinars this week, I would highly recommend looking into it. I found myself at the age of 15 in London working on shows at the Lyric Hammersmith, which felt a very long way from Watermillock, but it was fantastic. I then did a degree, an entirely practical degree in technical and production arts at the Royal Conservatoire of Scotland. And it was invaluable because it meant a few things. I understand what every role has to play in creating an overall production, because whilst I was studying, I had to do those roles. So I did lighting, I did sound, I made props, I did scenic painting, I made Greek Orthodox priest hats for 2 weeks in my costume allocation. But it's really important because so much of the job as a designer is being able to hold conversations with different groups of people with different skill sets, pulling them all together and ending up with a fantastic presentation at the end of it. So then in my final year, I specialised down in 3 areas. I did design, lighting design and stage management. And in the last year of my degree, I designed 2 shows and worked as a stage manager in London. I just really loved the process of collaborating with all of these different people to try and put a show on. That was a real highlight for me, and it was such a buzz. It was a fantastic thing to do. However, having never done art at school, I sort of always struggled with being told, oh, well, if you didn't do art, you can't really do design. I'm here to say that that isn't the case. Being a designer is so much more than being able to draw pretty pictures. that is very helpful if you can do that, and that is a skill set you can certainly use. I'm envious if that is the case. But primarily it's about being able to communicate your ideas and adapt. How can you adapt those ideas to make the most of the situation that you're in, because it varies from day to day. I then went on to do a final year at a place called Motley Theatre Design course in London after being in Glasgow for 3 years. Firstly, I hated it. It was freezing cold in the back of Theatre Royal, Drury Lane, and I didn't really understand what I was doing there. I'd taken the plunge, decided to see if I could be a designer, do this extra year's training, and it's really tough. It was very tough because I was being asked what my aesthetic was, and that was where I learned that it's much more about your aesthetic and much more about your creative abilities, your problem solving, and the ways in which you communicate with people. I've been fortunate enough to have worked all over, from opera houses in Germany to refugee camps in Palestine. I've done Shakespeare in Urdu in Pakistan. I did the first ever all Chinese Noel Coward in Beijing. And a lot of the companies that I worked for were companies that I started out with as a stage manager. So that's a bit of a background about me. As you can see, I maybe didn't take the normal route, as it were, but I don't think there is such a thing as a normal route. So my job on a day-to-day basis is really varied, and it's a long process often. With operas, you could be working on an opera for 2 to 3 years before the show opens. With a fringe play, you could be doing it in a turnaround of 3 weeks. And all of the other shows that I do are somewhere in the middle of that timeline. The process from receiving a script or being asked to listen to a piece of music and then create an aesthetic world differs to some degree, but the fundamentals for me are always the same. Each designer will have their own process and their own system, and I'm just going to talk you through mine and also give you guys a chance to design something too in the best possible way we can do that via a webinar scenario. So firstly, the heart of my job is trying to work out what is the best way to tell a particular story to an audience. So if I'm not telling the story that is in the text or that is in the music, then I'm not doing my job right. That is the core of the work that I do, or at least I try to ensure that's always at the core of the work that I do. So we're going to talk about as if we were designing a theatre play. And so, first of all, sounds very simple, but I read it. And I read it a few times. I'll read it the first time just as an enjoyment and see if I get a reaction to it, what I found funny, what I found sad. And then I go back through and read it again and note the obvious things that are mentioned in the text. So that's anything to do with props. And props are things like a pen or a cup of tea, or she has a biscuit or something like that. Furniture, so anything that's sat on or used in the space, any costume bits, and then any character bits. So are there any mentions of someone being a bit wiry or flamboyant? And it's a bit like being a detective. You're sort of wanting to read the text and really siphon off all of the bits of information that you can use to inform the aesthetic world that you're going to try and create. I need to know all of those details so that I can try and understand why they are there, how they relate to the story. Once I know that, I can decide, along with the director, which bits I want to put in there. Just because a play is written in a very naturalistic way, which would mean describing every little bit of a Victorian drawing room, doesn't mean that you have to put that all on stage. But what it does mean is that you need to know the reasons why it was like that. What is the feeling behind that? what was the intention for the characters, that the writer has put that in there. You can't just dismiss it without good reason, is my belief, because otherwise then you're losing the core of the story. So to use a Victorian drawing room as an example, they were often very cluttered, they were often very lush, highly patterned, cozy, warm, etc. So why, if that is the feeling that the writer has tried to put in for that scene, you can replicate that feeling in a different era, in a different period, and in a different way, but you need to understand the fundamental feeling and the reason why it was written that way first, rather than, as I say, just dismissing it. I hope that makes sense. So once I know all of those things, and I've decided with the director which bits we might stick with and which bits we might not, to make sure that we're telling the best possible version of the story that we want to present to the audience, I go through again and just double check everything that's there. So I'm going to read a bit of text, and this is a bit of text that all of the groups are using, all of the panelists are using this week. And I'm going to read it, and I'd like you to put in the chat anything that jumps out as a bit of information that you would need to know. It's not very long, and we'll see how we go. So, when we're together in those bedrooms, surrounded by other people's things, I pretend they're our things, that it's our bedroom, in our first home together. It's matching nightstand lamps and a week's old glass of water. It's wardrobes and shoes, books and socks, kicked to corners. That what we're really doing is living our life, just going out or coming in, heading to bed, the dentist, Asda. Boring stuff, but our stuff. That the water on the nightstand's mine. Some of those books are haunted with my thoughtful dedications written out for you from years of happy birthdays. And those kicked stray socks belong to you, in a life that we together could have together. After meeting by such chance, with all the stars willing you to look at me as I look at you, and not 'cause you're dressed like that, you could be stood there in jeans and a t-shirt and I'd still love you. So, is there anything in there that jumps out to you that you might think might be needed on stage? So we were talking about furniture, costume, any bits about the character, or any props. And props means small things that the actors might handle, or bits of decoration in the space. It's not a test, you won't be failed, but is there anything that stands out in what I've just read on that? Yeah, glass of water. Yeah. Yeah, so glass of water, socks, books. Is there any mention of what type of room we might be looking at specifically? What is the relationship intended to be a jumble of room? Unmade beds. Oh, that's interesting. What is the relationship intended to be a jumble of a room, unmade beds, hotel, question mark? That's interesting thought. A couple's room, yeah. Anything else? Lovers, family. That's nice. Okay, So given what you've mentioned, yes, Emily, you beat me to it. Do you think it sounds period or contemporary? I think it sounds contemporary, absolutely. So we're looking at something that we're thinking about now, aren't we? So that's sort of an example of how you would take a bit of text and pull out what you would need. You answered the questions perfectly, thank you very much. And so with that information, armed with that information, I would do a storyboard. If it's not too much of a pain, I would grab a pen and a piece of paper, and we're going to try and do a little storyboard. If you don't have it, that's fine, because I won't be able to see it anyway, but I hope that maybe you'll do the exercise and send it in later, or send us a little snapshot. So we'll carry on, but if you are able to get a pen and a piece of paper, that would be really fantastic. So as I say, I collect all of that information, and then I look at doing a storyboard. And a storyboard basically means quickly sketching down scene to scene to scene the action that might happen in the space. The idea being that when you're imagining the actors in the space, the physical space is created around them. So we've ascertained that there's a glass of water. So what is the glass of water sitting on? Is it on the floor? Is it on a nightstand? Is it on a table? Books, are they in bookshelves? Are they loose on the floor? Emily mentioned books and Derek mentioned jumble of a room. So are they on shelves or are they on stacks on the floor? We don't know. That's a choice that we are able to make as the designer. If it's a couple's room, is it same sex? Is it a man and a woman? Is it a hotel? So Derek, you mentioned potentially it could be set in a hotel. So how does that hotel room look versus a room in a domestic house? So we've got all of these bits of information and we're going to try and put them into a storyboard. I'm going to show you an example of a storyboard. As I mentioned, I didn't do art, and it isn't about being a fantastic artist and drawing really quickly. Stickmen are your friends. This is for a show that I did, and it just means that I very quickly can have a few ideas. I always start with a person or one key piece of furniture and then build the space around them. So that's a version of a storyboard, and we're going to quickly do one for this room that we've all been thinking about. I'm going to read the first section again, and what I'm going to suggest that you do, and I'm going to do it too, is quickly sketch a couple of versions of how this room might look given what we know from the text. So when we're together in those bedrooms, surrounded by other people's things, I pretend they're our things, that it's our bedroom in our first home together. It's matching nightstand lamps and a week's old glass of water. It's wardrobes and shoes, books and socks, kicked to corners. That what we're really doing is living our life. Just going out or coming in, heading to bed, the dentist, Asda. Boring stuff, but our stuff. So we're just going to take 5 minutes and do a little sketch. So go. I'm going to do it too on a bit of scrap paper. And if anybody's got any questions at this point while sketching away, please do drop them in the chat, and we'll see how we go. Okay, I've got an idea. Well, one idea. You've got a minute left if you want to give that another minute. As I say, it's not about beautiful drawings, it's just about a couple of ideas or one idea. Okay, so in the absence of being able to see your drawings, which I really encourage you to send it in, I'd love to see them. I'll show you mine, and as I say, I've just done it on a bit of scrap paper. Hopefully you can see it actually. So I really loved your ideas that you've mentioned. One, the two things that stood out was a jumble of a room and the potential of it being a hotel and whether it was a couple's room. So 3 things that really stood out. So I think it feels to me like a windowless room. I don't think it's particularly jolly. It feels quite sad. So anything natural light-wise feels like it'd be potentially too nice. So yeah, as I've got very quick sketches here, in my head, I could see that potentially there's a bed, because the quickest way to say bedroom, whether it's hotel or domestic, would be to have a bed. And by having a double bed, it would suggest that there's a partnership and a coupling and a joining there, rather than a single bed, which would tell us something very different about the characters that are there. It said 2 matching nightstands, so I thought that would be quite good, and they could have some lights on, which would be quite good for lighting and would give us quite a somber mood, rather than using theatre lights. And then wardrobes, and I wondered whether you mentioned loss and reflection and sense of identity, whether if we had those types of wardrobe doors that have mirrors on, as opposed to big wardrobe with lots of clothes and stuff tumbling out. And so that's my idea there. And then the other idea I've done is here, similar wardrobe, but I just looked at a different orientation. So similar items, but different orientation of the space. And in both instances, the reason why we're doing the storyboard is, can you see how the way I've drawn it, I now know where the audience are looking into the space? So I've opened up a space, I've opened up a room, automatically it's been an instinctive reaction to the text, which means I know how I'm negotiating the room to an audience. Obviously, if it was a space that was in the round, you couldn't have any walls. You'd have to think of something else. But for Theatre by the Lake example, in the main house, you could obviously have walls and it would all connect. temporary housing for homeless migrants, newly released prisoner. Yeah, all great ideas. The challenge is knowing the rest of the text, which I can't read you, but I think it's great examples of how you can take so many different interpretations from one particular bit of text, and it's your job as a designer with the director to work out which version you want to do. So now that we've done our storyboard, we've storyboarded our whole piece, and we've learned about the world the writer was writing about. We've learned what happens in that world, so what action is needed. You know, in this instance there was no door, but is a door needed? Do they have a table? Do they need a chair? We've worked out where our audience might be viewing the space from. We would know how many people might be in the space. And then once we've understood all of those points, we're now on a path of which version of a story we're telling. So I would suggest that for this, we've done a couple's room that's contemporary, or it's a couple that are in a hotel. Either way, it seems quite somber. There's an element of reflection, an element of loss, and it's not particularly jolly. That seems to be the concurrent feeling from the chat, which is quite useful. So once I've done the storyboard, or sometimes in tandem with the storyboard, I will go and look at images. The main thing I do is I try and go to a library. I always go to a library, in fact. It's really important to expand where you're getting your visual influences from. You can look online. There is a myriad of information out there, but to look online, you already have to start with a search term. You're already restricting what comes up to you, to your eyes. With a library, I will go and I will just go to the sculpture section or to the photography section, flick through books and just see what you stumble across. Obviously it's a little bit harder at the moment, but it's really important to do that because you find better ideas, you get better inspiration. So given that we can't go to a library, I would suggest that you think a little bit about your own bedroom, or your parents' bedroom, or your aunt's bedroom, or a bedroom that you can picture in your mind that might tie into this. What does it look like? This bedroom that we're talking about in the text, what does that bedroom look like? So we've done a quick storyboard, we've imagined real life bedrooms, and what are the key elements that we want to keep in this bedroom that we're designing. So we're sort of taking two things, mashing them together to make the best version of this bedroom that we're then going to put on stage. So this won't take very long, but I just want you to have a little think about that. So now what we're going to think about, we've ascertained that there's probably a bed, there's probably some nightstands, there's probably some lights, but what colour is it? Is there wallpaper on the walls? Is it a painted wall? Are the walls crisp, fresh, lovely? Are they really old, nicotine stained? Is there mould? Yeah, that's what I'd like you to have a little think about. So just to go back over that again, we've worked out what's in our bedroom, what pieces of furniture are in our bedroom. We have worked out the action that's going to take place in there. So we've said that there's going to be a bed, and the text would have told us more about the action. We're sort of making it up a little bit for this purpose of this exercise. But now, using bedrooms that or rooms that you've seen in your life, because we can't get to a library and we're not going to Google it, what colours are you imagining in relation to this piece of text? What textures, what finishes? Have you got any ideas about that? I'll just give you a couple of minutes to have a little think about that. It does mean if you've got a multiple set of ideas about how to do this bedroom, you'll have to pick one and come up with some ideas for that. So just take a couple of minutes to think about the colour and the texture of the space. Has anybody got any ideas about any colours? Tired yellowish paintwork, nice. It's a nice idea. Any patterns or flats or anything like that? What about the bedding on this bed? White, grey, because it sounds like it's quite sad and dismal. Yeah, that's really good too. Grubby grey duvet. Grey is a popular choice. Yeah, I think you're totally right. I think that's two really good instincts. And what's great is you've taken that from a particular bit of text, because you don't have any visuals, all the rest of the text to go from. So clearly some potential designers in the room. So then I have all of this information, I've got loads in my toolkit now, and I go to make a model. And so a model is basically a 1:25 version of everything that we are putting on stage, that we're proposing to put on stage. I make a basic black box, which is the stage area. Gives me the playing space, and also, for example, the Theatre by the Lake main house has an opening arch at the front, which is called a proscenium arch. So I would make that out of black card, and then I make a white card version of what I want my design to look like. And white card basically means a way of demonstrating the size and the scale of the things that I want to be in the space for the design, for the story that I'm trying to tell. And for this, I'm just going to show you some pictures of some white cards that I've made specifically for Keswick. So Lady Killers was part of the season that I did last year. I did all of my research, I did all my storyboarding, I found loads of images, and then I made the white card model. So this is a model that is 1:25 scale and shows exactly what I want to have built. So this is the front view of the truck that I designed. Hopefully you can all see that. So surrounded by black, because that is what I've made for the theatre. And then what I've made is a model 1:25 of this, which is what you're looking at. So you can see there's a front door, a set of stairs that go upstairs. There's a bedroom upstairs where someone can stand. And then underneath where the person is standing upstairs, you've also got a kitchen. So this lets everybody know that I'm presenting it to, that this is my rough design. This is what I want. Once I've done that, I also look at putting in the furniture, because it dictates the space and the movement that the actors are able to make in the space. So it's useful a great deal for the director, and then also everybody else that I'm going to have to work with to make the final product. So here's the same model, but with the furniture in. So you can see we're going to need a sofa and a rug, an armchair, and we've got a bed upstairs and some chairs, and the structure itself has remained the same. As I said, it's 1:25, so I use a scale ruler in order to do that. I mentioned very early on that my maths is not the best, so scale ruler is to die for. And these are some examples of the model furniture that I made for that particular model that you're looking at. So that's a model bed, single bed. And alongside with making the furniture, I'll also find references so that it's super clear what it is that I want for the end product, for the end production. Here's my little armchair. And there's various ways in which you could make these. That would be a whole nother webinar. And I've got a little chair and a little oven. So I'm showing you these ones in particular just because they were in the model. And you can see from these that these are painted. So that's what I do next. I've done my white card. I know what I want it to look like. I know the size of things. I know the space of things. And so then I paint it. I end up with the final model. So that's a bit like what we were doing when we were talking about imagining the colours, imagining the finishes. All of the research that I would have done has informed all of those reactions to what I'm ending up with as a final design. So here is a model picture, but the model is now finished, is now painted. So this particular woman was a little bit older. The house was very specifically dated, and it was all suffering from subsidence. So we put in things like wonky banisters, which hopefully you can see here. The door wasn't straight, the window wasn't straight, these weren't straight, and the wallpaper was sort of peeling off. So Derek, you mentioned tired yellowish wallpaper. You can have very simple effects where that bit of aging or making it feel a bit tired gives you a lot about the character, a lot about what the person who inhabits this space has to say. And that's where you can have quite a bit of fun with the final model. It also means that a scenic painter, who would be someone who's helping you realise that final design, has all of the reference that they need to go from. So they will copy what you've done in this model. It's why you have to make sure that that model is as accurate as you can manage. Things will always change, but that is just the next part of the process. And once you've done that final model, the theatre and everybody who's working on the project has a central point of information. It means that they can decide whether they can afford it, what needs to change, what needs to be adapted. And then you also use that as your first day of rehearsals to present to the cast that are going to be performing in that space. You would then also show them the costumes, which is part of the next stage. You would often be doing the costumes at the same time as the set, but given that it was a 45-minute workshop, I thought it might have been a bit too much to try and do the clothes as well. And here's just one final picture of the lady killers. If anybody did see it, we had to have a room where we could fit 5 people upstairs. So my design had to be dictated by the need for an upstairs and a downstairs. So at the core of it, as we discussed, it's very much about being a detective, getting to the bottom of what the story needs and providing it for everybody that needs it. So then you go through the rehearsals, you get to the final stage, and that would be the technical rehearsal. So the technical rehearsal is where you have everything finally put in the space and pieced together. So you'll have the costumes on the actors, the actors will be in the space, you're adding the lighting, you're adding the sound, and you slowly work your way through the piece to pull everything together. Then you have a couple of test audiences, it's opening night, and the set and costume designer waves goodbye and wishes everybody a fantastic show. So that is the process that I do every time I design a show. Maybe that's a good point for questions if anybody has any particular questions. Okay, well, I'll just carry on a little bit longer. Just to sort of say, because I've worked in a couple of other mediums, there are variants that depend and change every project that you work on. So whether it's theatre, opera or dance, you're adapting accordingly. Dance, you often don't have any text, so you're reacting to a music or discussion with a choreographer. Opera, music is God, and everything must be done with making sure that music and the sound is the best possible showcase that you can possibly do. You then also have the variation of spaces. So is it in a traditional space? Is it in a park? Is it on water? Is it going to have to be on tour? That's something else that I have to bear in mind. Then you also have the budget, which is always can be a bit of a killjoy, but work with the budget and then you can get the best possible version, the best bang for your buck. So it's always worth taking that into account. And then the audience experience, the second they walk in through the door, they're in your hands, and so it's your job to make sure that they are looked after and they're shown the right things. Emily, do you spend a lot of time on site or do you do a lot of it remotely? It's a bit of both, really. It depends on the job, depends on how much they're going to pay you. I love to be on site as much as possible. Certainly once the stage starts to get fit up, so when they build the set on the stage, you're there every day. It might just be the rehearsal process that you're not there every day. Primarily because you're having to visit the workshops where it's being built, you're checking on the painting, you're helping find the costumes, you're doing the costume fittings, so you can't physically be in rehearsals all the time. But it does often feel like there's never quite enough time to be there as much as you would like, but we do try our best. Is it hard to do something that's already been done before? That's a really good question. I don't find that to be hard, no, but I don't ever look at a show, other designs, whilst I'm designing it. So Lady Killers, for example, has been put on a lot. I never look at any other designs until I've decided what I want for my piece. I have colleagues that's their first thing they go to because they want to make sure that they don't come up with any ideas that have been done before. But I know my brain doesn't work like that. My brain retains someone else's design and then I can't come up with my own idea. So you very much have to find your own technique for that one. Sometimes I watch a film version because that's very, very different. It's a different media, so it varies, but I don't find it hard, but that's because I ignore everyone else's designs. Do I instinctively prefer minimalist or very detailed sets? It's a very good question. I've been asked that a lot. I would say that my aesthetic errs towards the abstract rather than the minimalist. So I tend to pick the key pieces that might be needed and not complicate the story. So I do quite like doing fully naturalistic, very detailed sets, and I do quite a bit of them. Miss Julie was one, for example. That was a kitchen that had every pot and pan and spoon and herb and everything we could squeeze onto that set, but there was no real walls, there was no real door, there was a floor. So that's a way of mixing the two genres, mixing the two worlds in an effort to have a clear story. And so that would be where I instinctively prefer to put my aesthetic. The famous Ralph Colty always said you can do any show in any black box, in any space, in any world, with a chair, so long as it's the right chair. And that is where my instincts go with designing. Emily Johnston, can you be my apprentice? Well, hey, if I get to come back to work, and especially if I get to come back to Theatre by the Lake, you're in. Come and visit me. It would be lovely to meet you. So if anybody's got any more questions, happy to answer them. Please send in your little sketches. I'd love to see what you came up with for the bedroom or the room or the refugee or any of those versions that you came up with. But yes, I think that's all I've got to say today. And it's thank you for coming, and Theatre by the Lake, thank you for organising it. For Handbag, you created such a sense of space by ending the set. Thank you. It's one of my favourite designs, I have to say. It was, yeah, that was a fun one to do, but it is a great play, Handbag, so that helps.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Louie. That was it was so interesting to hear the process that you go through. I know that we have worked together, so I've seen parts of the process before, but I've never heard you explain it from start to finish, usually because you don't have time, because you're doing it. So there's not time. But yeah, no, thank you for taking the time to come and chat to us about it. And thank you everybody for coming and for your insights and your questions. I've had one email already with some designs, so I will I've emailed them through, and any more that come through I will send on as well. Yeah, just a reminder that we've got 3 more webinars coming up, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday this week. So do feel free to sign up for those, or watch them and rewatch the others on YouTube. After the event, they'll be up at some point next week, I think. But yeah, that's it really. Thank you so much for coming, and I hope you have enjoyed yourselves and you go away and design lots of sets in whatever way you see them. And maybe, people like Emily, maybe you'll be the next designer at Theatre by the Lake, who knows. Thanks very much, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.